When you think of rallying, you think of Lancia. When you think of Formula One, you think of Ferrari. And when you think of endurance racing, you think of Porsche. The sports car manufacturer from Stuttgart has won every major endurance race and championship in the world, including the 24 Hours of Daytona 24 times, and the 24 Hours of Le Mans 19 times. And what's crazier is that 11 of those 19 wins can be linked to one engine family. A family that technically got started with the 936, but really came into its own with the main topic of today, the Porsche 956. After the wild success of the 917 in Group 4 sports car racing, Porsche followed the FIA and switched to Group 6, and unsurprisingly won both the championship and Le Mans. But then, sports car racing entered a very weird period of time at the end of 1979, where there was no top class. The new Group C regulations were debuting in 1982, and the groups were disbanded at the end of 1979. It was this lack of regulations that allowed Jean Rondeau to win in a car of his own design in 1980. And by 1981, all Porsche had were some 924 GTPs, which were based off the four-cylinder front-engined 924. Not exactly fast. And well, Porsche just couldn't be bothered to compete if they weren't gonna win. So they wheeled out a retired 936, threw in their 2.65-liter engine from their failed IndyCar program, and sent the 936-81 to Le Mans. And with Jackie Ickx and Derek Bell behind the wheel, they took victory 4 years after their last win with the car. In fact, their only real rival was, ironically enough, a privateer 936, modified by Jost Racing called the 908 J80. But they retired with accident damage. Porsche's success with the tweaked IndyCar engine was enough to convince them to use it as the basis for their 936 replacement, the 956. Now, the new Group C rules were incredibly loose, and development of the new prototype began as soon as the 936 crossed the finish line in 1981. Because of these lax regulations, the 956 was Porsche's biggest game changer, maybe in their entire history. The chassis was now an aluminum monocoque, which made the car weigh less than 1,800 pounds. It also had ground effect underbody aerodynamics, similar to the ones used by Formula One cars of the era, except bigger because the car was bigger. And this bigger device meant even more downforce, over 2,200 pounds of it, meaning, theoretically, at top speed, the 956 could drive upside down, as Porsche illustrates in their museum. Then it was topped off with their first-generation PDK dual-clutch transmission, and hit the track. In the inaugural 1982 Group C season, Porsche stormed away from their competitors, winning 4 out of the 8 races to take the crown. One of those 4 races was Le Mans, which Porsche won with a 1-2-3 finish. Not only was the 956 capable of generating stupid downforce at 225 miles an hour, it was also reliable while doing it. And then Porsche did something that almost no one else does even today. They sold their top prototype racer to privateers. For just $256,000, you too could own a 956, which is a great deal, by the way, since they now go for about $9 to $13 million. See, Porsche obviously wanted the factory team to win, but at the end of the day, a Porsche win is a Porsche win. They will take that all the time. So while they did keep some of the best tech to themselves, like having a single-piece ground effect floor versus a customer-spec twin-piece, privateer Jost Racing still took 2 outright wins, with, ironically enough, the same 956 at 2 consecutive Le Mans. Porsche ended up building 25 for privateer competition, and it worked. Porsche won the championship 3 more times the 956, and took 3 more Le Mans victories, including in 1983, where they scored a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 finish, with only a single Sauber C7 in the top 10, finishing 9th. In fact, the 956 was so fast that Stefan Bellof set the Nürburgring Nordschleife lap record during 1983 qualifying session at 6 minutes 11 seconds, a record that would stand for 35 years until Porsche themselves beat it with the 919 Evo. One would reasonably assume that setting the Nürburgring lap record and securing 9 out of the top 10 finishing positions at Le Mans would be good enough for Porsche, but they decided to stay ahead of the competition and upgrade the design into the 1984 956B. It had better suspension and better aero, but most importantly, it had the recently developed Bosch Motronic fuel injection system, which gave them 635 horsepower and phenomenal fuel economy compared to their rivals. It was this evolution of a brilliant formula that allowed Porsche to win 79% of all World Sports Car Championship races between 1982 and 1984. By this point, there was only one problem with 956. It wasn't supposed to be an FIA exclusive. It was supposed to race in both the World Sports Car Championship and the US IMSA GTP class. However, because the driver's legs were positioned ahead of the front axle, it wasn't allowed to race on safety concerns. And those concerns were valid. Our king of the Nürburgring, Stefan Bellof, died in a 956 during an accident. So when Porsche developed their replacement, they made sure to address that discrepancy. The 962 was basically a long wheelbase evolution of the 956B. In fact, to the untrained eye, it looks almost identical to the previous model, while using a larger displacement version of the same engine, from 2.8 liters to 3.2. And although they lost the 1984 IMSA title to Randy Lanier's drug-smuggling Blue Thunder Racing, 1985 reminded everyone of what Porsche wanted to do: dominate. They returned to IMSA and swept 16 out of 17 races, while also winning 8 out of the 10 World Sports Car Championship races across the pond, including Le Mans, where they scored another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 finish. Then they repeated this feat in 1986, while 1987 marked Porsche's 7th consecutive victory at Le Sarthe and their 8th Endurance Championship in 6 years. But 1987 also saw a turning point in Porsche's era of glory. Their rivals finally found a chink in their armor. Cobb Walkinshaw Racing's Jaguar team figured out that if you placed the rear wing in just the right spot, you could work with the ground effect aerodynamics to create a long tail effect without adding extra bits and drag. Porsche couldn't do this because the position of their flat six engine forced its way into interfering with the ground effect tunnels at least a little bit. And with the 962 development slowing down, Jaguar didn't hesitate. The 962 may have won the IMSA title in 1987, but Jaguar took the Group C title for the first time. Porsche's reliability and consistency meant that they got that 7th consecutive Le Mans victory, but Jaguar ended that streak too in 1988, beating the second place 962 by just 180 meters. Porsche, though, didn't really care. They had won anything and everything for 6 straight years. They didn't see a justification in spending money to prove a point they already made, and they dropped out. So it's up to the privateers to beat the factory teams, and that didn't work. Sure, by the end of their racing record, there were around 150 962s produced, either by Porsche themselves or licensed out to well-funded privateers like Kremer. Kremer, in fact, would use various versions of the 962, including the open cockpit K8 Spider, until 1998. But let me be clear on this. A Porsche 962 never again saw a victory at Le Mans, scoring its last podium in 1990 by finishing 3rd. But then in 1994, the FIA changed the top class from Group C1 to GT1, which required a production run of 25 road cars to be built. In the spirit of the regulations, in the actual writing of the regulations, there was a strange yet crucial clause. You only had to pinky promise to build 25 in order to compete. You did not have to have them built before you start racing. So Porsche called German fashion mogul Jochen Dauer to form an unlikely partnership Dauer had run a recently defunct DTM team for a few years when Porsche asked him if he wanted to build 25 road cars of the 962 so they'd be eligible to compete in the GT1 class at Le Mans without any of the handicaps put on the prototypes. Intrigued by the crazy idea, he agreed, and Dauer Sportswagen built the 962 Le Mans road car, heavy air quotes, for the 1994 race. Although maybe those air quotes weren't so necessary, because the road car had carbon fiber bodywork, a leather interior, and even a DVD player. Maybe it was a road car after all, except it absolutely wasn't, because it also had a de-restricted 3-liter racing engine making 720 horsepower in a 2,400-pound road car from 1993. It did 254 miles an hour and 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds, 12 years before the Bugatti Veyron was launched. Sure, only 13 were built in 5 years, so it's not really a production car, but because of that loophole about promised production, it was allowed to race nonetheless. The Dauer 962 had smaller tires and less horsepower compared to their prototypes that year, but the GT1 regulations allowed for a larger fuel tank. Porsche hoped that the consistency and efficiency of the Dauer would be enough to dethrone the faster Toyotas. And it was. The 962 could run 3 laps longer per stint than their Japanese rivals and close the gap to said rivals as the morning broke. Closing the gap meant that when Toyota lost 13 minutes fixing their gearbox, Dauer took a 1-2 lead with just 90 minutes left in the race. Toyota flew by to get second, but they ran out of time to catch first, and Dauer took the victory and the 962's first win in 7 years. The FIA wasn't particularly thrilled with this interpretation of the rules and shut down that loophole in 1995, which left Porsche in a bind. Do you build a GT1 car to continue the fight in the top class at Le Mans, or do you build a prototype for IMSA with guest appearances at Le Mans? Well, they chose to do both. Porsche would design the GT1 car completely in-house, while the prototype would be built in cooperation with TWR. Yes, that is the group that ran the factory Jaguar team who beat them in 1988. If you can't beat them, hire them, I guess. Now, the 911 GT1 was a 911 in the same way that a Formula Drift Yaris is the same as a 2009 Yaris CL. The front subframe was from a 993 generation 911, but the rear subframe was from, you guessed it, the old 962, still using that 600 horsepower 3.2-liter flat 6 mounted in the middle. This made it not only the first and so far only road-legal mid-engine 911, but also the first water-cooled 911. And the prototype was even weirder. It was based on TWR's old Group C1 Jaguar XJR14, even using Jaguar chassis number 691, but then they sent it over to Porsche, who gave it a new open-top body and a 3-liter version of the 962 racing engine, making 540 horsepower. But just as the WSC-95 chassis number 001 was finished, IMSA changed the rules, preventing Porsche from taking part. So, focusing on their GT1 program, they scrapped the project in 1995, sending it to die in storage. Until Joest Racing, the guys who won outright in the 80s, they made a sweet-talk deal with Porsche in 1996 to take the car off of their hands, along with the parts necessary to build chassis number 002. Joest got TWR to finish the second car in just 3 months, so they could make the May Le Mans testing deadline. Now, Joest figured they had an advantage over the 911 GT1s because of the superior fuel economy and the smaller engine. But they had no idea just how much of an advantage they would have. Not only did they destroy Porsche in practice, they got pole position in qualifying ahead of the Courageous and Ferrari prototypes. Not to mention the 911 GT1s far behind, and despite the pace of the Ferraris and the Courageous, 1996 became a Porsche civil war between the WSC-95 and the 911 GT1. Joest led 1-2 throughout the night, but were unable to shake the fast-charging 911, significantly improving from their qualifying positions. The Porsche factory team played a brilliant trump card when Hans Joachim Stuck pulled off a monster triple stint in his 911 to leapfrog the 002 Jost and catch right up to the leading 001. Pier Luigi Martini tried to regain position with the 002, but spun off down to 4th, eventually retiring from that position with driveshaft failure with just 40 minutes left in the race. But try as they might, Porsche was just not able to beat Jost's Porsche, and the WSC-95 took the win by a lap. It was the first LMP car to ever win at Le Mans, and Jost even managed to keep it, since part of the deal was if he wins, he could keep the car. Since they scrapped the project, didn't think they would win. But you know what? They kept their word. And the WSC-95 chassis 001 returned to Le Mans for 1997. But so did Porsche, who brought 6 privateer 911 GT1s and 2 factory GT1 Evos. The Evos had revised aerodynamics to give the new road car a top speed of 205 down the Mulsanne straights. But it was Jost who once again drew first blood by using his lone entry. He only entered a single car, and he used it to secure another pole position ahead of a GT1 Evo. And over the course of the race, it was neck and neck. First against the 911s, and then the new McLaren F1 GTR Longtail. Now the reason McLaren took over chasing duties is because all but 2 of the 911s retired throughout the race, including one Evo bursting into flames while leading. This left 2 privateer cars to finish in a pretty mediocre 5th and 8th. Not great day for the Porsche factory team. McLaren, though, was just as fast as the WSC-95, less than 2 miles an hour slower down the straights. But it was enough. Jost edged just that tiny little gap, and the 001 took its 2nd consecutive victory at Le Mans, one of only 5 cars in history to win Le Mans twice. And again, Jost is one of those cars already. They did it with the old 956, taking wins in 1983 and 1984 with the same number 7 car, making them the only team to ever do it twice. The back-to-back wins with their failed program convinced Porsche they shouldn't have given up on it, and bought it back from Jost. And ironically, they couldn't make it work. Their new LMP 198 retired at the 1998 24 Hours of Le Mans, and only had a single podium finish on the other side of the Atlantic in the 1998 Petit Le Mans in IMSA. Luckily for Porsche, they had something else up their sleeve for 1998. In an ironic twist of fate, they ended up following their original 1994 plan and entered the LMP 198 and the GT 198 for Le Mans. But calling the new GT 198 a road car is a very big stretch. As in, they built one road car, prototype, and then didn't sell it. Now, to be honest, this seems like an abysmal failure. If you actually read the stats on this car, it only won a single race. The Mercedes-Benz CLK GTR, which partially inspired the GT 198, was the faster car, winning every single race of the season. Well, except one. The 911 was horrifically slow in a straight line, but they still used the tried-and-tested 962 engine, whose core design now dated back almost 20 years, and they sent it to Le Mans. Toyota and Mercedes were lightning fast yet again at the Circuit de la Sarthe, but struggled in a horrific race of attrition, a race that Porsche just declined to take part in. So all that was left to fight Porsche were the slower Nissan R390s and the outdated McLaren F1 GTRs. Porsche scored an easy 1-2 finish that year that was 3 laps clear of the 3rd place Nissan. But they didn't rest on their laurels. That same year they began developing the LMP 2000 for the new century of endurance racing with their abandoned 3.5-liter V10, finally retiring the 962's engine. But for one reason or another, it was never finished. And instead, Porsche just retired from Le Mans until 2015 and finished off the year in IMSA. The GT1 Evos in 1998 scored 2 wins out of the 3 events they entered, including the previously mentioned 1998 Petit Le Mans. but the last GT1 continued racing in privateer hands in the 1999 IMSA Championship, finishing 7th overall with a best result of 4th at the 12 Hours of Sebring. And that was it. The architecture, dating back to the 956, technically the 936, was over. Between 1981 and 1998, Porsche won 3 IMSA championships, 5 World Sports Car championships, and took 11 outright victories at Le Mans. Meaning if you drove a Porsche prototype at any time in those 19 years, you had a 58% chance of winning, which I'm sure is how math works. But here is something that absolutely works for the math. Porsche filled 61% of all podium slots over that 19-year period. The Type 935 Flat 6 is the most successful engine in Le Mans history. Not only does Porsche have the most wins, their 7 consecutive winning streak is unmatched even by Ferrari's dominance in the 60s or Toyota's dominance in the 2020s. And the fact that you can directly trace the engine, chassis, and driveline of the 1998 GT198 back to the original 1982 956 is such an insane statement it's almost impossible to comprehend. Yes, they arguably shouldn't have won 1987, 1994, or 1998, since their rivals were faster. But a wise man once said, in order to win Le Mans, first you must finish it.